Ladies, I want you to imagine for a moment that everyone you trusted most in this world suddenly turned their backs on you. Not over something you did, but over something you absolutely, completely never did. Now imagine that betrayal lasting not just days or weeks, but 3 entire years of your life. This is exactly what happened to me, and I'm sharing this story because I know so many of you listening have experienced that gut-wrenching feeling when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally decide you're guilty without giving you a fair chance to prove your innocence. My name is Sarah, and I'm 28 years old now, but this story begins when I was 25, living in a small town in Missouri with my family. You know how some families look perfect from the outside but have all these undercurrents of competition and resentment bubbling just beneath the surface? That was us. I lived with my parents, Michael, who was 57 and worked as a high school chemistry teacher, and my mother, Rebecca, who was 55 and had spent her entire career as a registered nurse at our local hospital. Then there was my older sister, Hannah, who was 30 at the time and seemed to have everything I thought I wanted in life. Growing up in our modest ranch-style house on Maple Street, Hannah and I had what I thought was a typical sister relationship. She was always the golden child, the one who seemed to excel at everything she touched without even trying, while I was content spending my afternoons reading in the backyard hammock or helping Mom in the garden. Hannah was busy winning academic awards, leading student government, and basically setting the bar so high that I never even bothered trying to reach it. I learned early on that it was easier to just be the easygoing younger sister than to compete with someone who seemed destined for greatness. Don't get me wrong, I loved Hannah deeply during those early years. She taught me how to French braid my hair when I was 8, helped me with my math homework when I struggled in middle school, and always made sure I was included when her friends came over, even though I was 3 years younger. But as we got older, I started noticing how different we really were. Hannah thrived on attention and achievement, while I was more comfortable blending into the background. She went to Northwestern University on a full academic scholarship and studied marketing, while I enrolled at the local community college because I honestly had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. After graduation, Hannah moved to Chicago and landed this amazing job at a prestigious advertising agency. Every time she came home for holidays, she had these incredible stories about client presentations, business trips to New York, and networking events with people whose names I recognized from magazines. Meanwhile, I was still living at home, working part-time at a local bookstore and taking random classes at the community college, trying to figure out what my passion was. The contrast between us became more pronounced with each visit, and I could see how proud our parents were of Hannah's success, even though they never made me feel bad about my different path. Looking back now, I realized there were signs that the family dynamics were more complicated than I understood at the time. During family dinners, the conversation always seemed to revolve around Hannah's accomplishments and exciting career developments, while my contributions to the conversation were more like pleasant interruptions. When relatives asked about us at family gatherings, Hannah got the spotlight with her impressive job title and salary, while I got the gentle, almost pitying questions about when I might figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I told myself it didn't bother me because I genuinely was happy for my sister's success, but I can see now that there was a part of me that felt invisible in my own family. The real drama began 3 years ago when Hannah got engaged to her boyfriend David, who was 33 and worked as a corporate lawyer at one of Chicago's top firms. David came from what you'd call old money, the kind of family that had been wealthy for generations, and knew how to make that wealth work for them. He was exactly the type of man our parents had always hoped Hannah would marry: successful, well-educated, and from a respectable family. When he proposed, it was with this absolutely stunning vintage diamond ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a gorgeous Art Deco piece that must have been worth more than I made in 2 years at the bookstore. The engagement party was held at our house, and Mom and Dad went all out, inviting what felt like half the town. I remember feeling so out of place that night, watching Hannah show off her ring to every guest while I helped serve appetizers and tried to make small talk with people I barely knew. Hannah's college friends and work colleagues were there, along with David's family and their country club friends, and I felt like I was serving at someone else's party rather than celebrating my own sister's engagement. I spent most of the evening in the kitchen, helping Mom keep the food trays full and listening to the laughter and conversations happening in the living room. For about a month after the engagement, everything seemed normal. Hannah was taking some time off work to help Mom plan the wedding, and she was staying with us for a week to get everything organized. I actually enjoyed having her home during that time because it felt like we were reconnecting as sisters. We spent hours looking through bridal magazines, talking about flower arrangements and reception venues, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were really bonding. Hannah seemed genuinely interested in my opinions about her wedding plans, and I was so happy to feel included in something that was important to her. Then came that Tuesday afternoon that changed everything. I had called in sick to the bookstore because I'd been fighting a cold, so I was home alone, curled up on the couch watching old movies and sipping tea with honey. Hannah and Mom had gone shopping for wedding decorations, and Dad was at school preparing for parent conferences that evening. The house was quiet and peaceful, exactly the kind of environment I needed to recover from being under the weather. I remember thinking how nice it was to have some alone time in the house, something that was rare when Hannah was visiting because she was always on the phone with David or her friends, making wedding plans. Around 2 in the afternoon, I heard Hannah and Mom come through the front door, their voices carrying that excited energy that comes from a successful shopping trip. They were laughing about something that had happened at the bridal shop, and I could hear them putting bags down in the kitchen and talking about all the pretty things they'd found. I stayed on the couch because I didn't want to get them sick, but I called out a greeting and asked how their trip went. Hannah sounded so happy when she answered, telling me about all the beautiful decorations they'd found and how everything was coming together perfectly for the wedding. About an hour later, I heard Hannah doing dishes in the kitchen, which was unusual because she never did housework when she was visiting, but I figured maybe she was just trying to be helpful since Mom had been running around all day. I was starting to doze off when I heard this blood-curdling scream from the kitchen. The sound was so terrifying and unexpected that I jumped up from the couch immediately, my heart pounding, and ran toward the kitchen to see what was wrong. What I found when I got to the kitchen was Hannah standing by the sink, looking absolutely frantic and panicked. Her face was white, and she was staring at the counter with this expression of complete disbelief. When she saw me, her expression instantly changed from panic to suspicion, and that's when she accused me of taking her engagement ring. She said she'd taken it off while doing dishes because she didn't want to damage it with the soap and hot water, and that she'd left it right there on the counter next to the sink. When she finished the dishes and reached for the ring, it was gone. I was completely stunned by the accusation. The idea that I would take Hannah's ring had never even occurred to me, and the suggestion was so shocking that at first I thought she was joking. But when I saw the serious, almost hostile expression on her face, I realized she was completely serious. I immediately told her that I hadn't been in the kitchen at all since they'd gotten home, that I'd been on the couch the entire time because I was sick. I offered to help her look for the ring, thinking maybe it had fallen behind the counter or rolled somewhere unexpected. But Hannah wasn't interested in looking for the ring or considering any other explanation. She kept insisting that I was the only other person in the house, so I had to be the one who took it. The more I denied it, the more convinced she became that I was lying. She started bringing up things from our childhood, saying I'd always been jealous of her success, and that I'd probably taken the ring to sell it so I could finally move out and do something with my life. The accusations were so hurtful and so completely wrong that I started crying, which only seemed to make Hannah more certain that I was guilty. When Mom and Dad got home about an hour later, they walked into what must have seemed like complete chaos. Hannah immediately launched into her version of events, crying and saying that her precious engagement ring was gone and that I was the only person who could have taken it. I tried to tell my side of the story, explaining that I'd been sick on the couch all afternoon and hadn't even gone into the kitchen, but I could see from their faces that they believed Hannah without question. The look of disappointment in Dad's eyes was something I'll never forget, and Mom just kept asking me how I could do such a thing to my own sister. The next few hours were like something out of a nightmare. My parents and Hannah turned the house upside down, searching through my bedroom, going through all my belongings, and looking in places where I might have hidden the ring. They didn't find the ring, of course, because I hadn't taken it, but they did find the small amount of money I'd been saving from my job at the bookstore. It wasn't much, maybe $800 that I'd been putting aside for months, hoping to save enough to take some additional college courses. But when Hannah saw the money, she immediately claimed it as proof that I'd already sold the ring. I tried desperately to explain that the money was from my paychecks, that I'd been saving it for months and had the bank statements to prove it, but nobody wanted to listen to my explanations. The money became evidence of my guilt in their minds, and no matter what I said, I couldn't convince them that I was telling the truth. That night, I lay in my bed listening to my family talk in hushed voices in the living room, planning what they were going to do about me. I felt more alone and helpless than I'd ever felt in my entire life. The next week was absolutely devastating. Every day, my parents and Hannah would pressure me to confess and tell them what I'd done with the ring. They threatened to call the police and have me arrested if I didn't come clean and return what I'd stolen. They treated me like a criminal in my own home, watching my every move and making it clear that they didn't trust me at all. I tried reaching out to a few friends for support, but most of my close friends from high school had moved away after graduation, and the few who were still in town seemed uncomfortable getting involved in what they saw as family drama. The isolation was crushing. I'd wake up every morning hoping that somehow my family would realize they'd made a mistake, that they'd apologize, and we could put this whole nightmare behind us. Instead, each day brought more accusations, more pressure to confess to something I hadn't done, and more evidence that the people I loved most in the world had completely lost faith in me. I started having trouble sleeping and eating, and I felt like I was living in some kind of alternate reality, where everything I'd believed about my family's love and trust had been stripped away. After a week of this treatment, my parents made the decision that would change my life forever. They called me into the living room and told me that I needed to leave their house. Dad did most of the talking, his voice cold and formal, like he was delivering a business presentation rather than kicking his own daughter out of the family home. He said they couldn't trust me anymore, that my presence in the house was causing too much stress for everyone, and that I was bringing shame on the family name by refusing to admit what I'd done and make things right. They gave me exactly 48 hours to pack my belongings and find somewhere else to live. The cruelty of that timeline still takes my breath away when I think about it. 48 hours to pack up 25 years of my life and figure out how to survive on my own with no family support, no savings beyond the $800 they'd confiscated as evidence, and no real plan for my future. I remember standing in my childhood bedroom that night, looking at all my belongings and trying to figure out what was essential enough to fit in the 2 suitcases I owned. The hardest part wasn't even the practical challenge of packing and finding somewhere to go. The hardest part was accepting that my family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, had chosen to believe the worst about me without giving me a fair chance to prove my innocence. As I folded my clothes and gathered my books, I kept waiting for one of them to come to my room and tell me they'd made a mistake, that they'd realized how wrong they were to treat me this way. But that moment never came. My salvation came from an unexpected source. Jake, a guy I'd known since high school who'd recently returned home after serving 4 years in the Marines, heard through mutual friends about what was happening and offered to let me sleep on his couch until I could get back on my feet. Jake and I had never been particularly close in school, but he'd always been one of those genuinely good people who stepped up when someone needed help. His small apartment wasn't much, just a 1-bedroom place above a hardware store downtown, but it represented safety and kindness when I desperately needed both. Moving out of my childhood home was one of the most painful experiences of my life. As I carried my suitcases to Jake's car, I saw Hannah watching me from her old bedroom window. For just a moment, I thought I saw something in her expression that might have been doubt or regret, but when our eyes met, she quickly looked away. I wanted so badly for her to come outside and stop me, to admit that maybe she'd been wrong and ask me to stay, so we could figure out what really happened to her ring. But she stayed at that window, and I left the only home I'd ever known feeling completely abandoned by the people who should have protected me. The next several months were a blur of survival and adaptation. I worked any job I could find to make ends meet, from washing dishes at a late-night diner to walking dogs for busy families to stocking shelves at a grocery store during the overnight shift. The work was hard and the hours were long, but it gave me a sense of purpose and helped me start building an independent life. Jake was incredibly kind during this period, never making me feel like a burden, even though I was clearly disrupting his space and routine. He helped me look for jobs, drove me to interviews when his schedule allowed, and most importantly, he listened when I needed someone to believe my side of the story. Eventually, I found steady work at a distribution center on the outskirts of town. The job involved organizing inventory and coordinating shipments, and while it wasn't glamorous, it provided consistent hours and decent pay. The work environment was actually quite positive, with a team of people who became like a second family to me. They didn't know about my situation with my real family, so they accepted me based on my work ethic and attitude rather than judging me for mistakes I hadn't made. For the first time in months, I started to feel like I had some control over my life and my future. With my first few paychecks, I was able to rent a small studio apartment not far from the distribution center. It wasn't much, just a single room with a tiny kitchen and bathroom, but it was mine. I remember the day I moved in, how proud I felt to have my own space that nobody could take away from me. I furnished it slowly with items from thrift stores and garage sales, and every small improvement felt like a victory. I was building a life that was completely my own, independent from the family that had rejected me. During this time, my family made several attempts to contact me. Mom would leave long, emotional voicemails asking me to come home and make things right, her voice breaking as she talked about how much she missed me and how sorry she was that things had gotten so complicated. Dad sent occasional text messages saying we needed to talk and work things out as a family. Hannah showed up at the distribution center once, but I refused to see her because I couldn't handle the emotional confrontation when I was trying so hard to build stability in my new life. I made the difficult decision to cut off all contact with them. It wasn't because I didn't love them or miss them, because I absolutely did. Every holiday was torture, seeing other families together while I spent the day alone in my studio apartment. Every time I heard a song that reminded me of singing with Mom in the car, or saw a father teaching his daughter to drive, I felt this deep ache for the family connections I'd lost. But I knew that having contact with them while they still believed I was a thief would only continue to hurt me, and I needed to focus on healing and moving forward. 3 years passed this way. I got promoted to a supervisor position at the distribution center, which came with better pay and health insurance. I started taking online business courses in the evenings, working toward a degree in logistics management. I made friends with my coworkers and even started dating someone, a kind man named Chris who worked in the company's accounting department. My life wasn't perfect, but it was stable, and I had built it entirely on my own terms. I was proud of what I'd accomplished, even though there was always an underlying sadness about what I'd lost. Then, last month, I received an email from Dad that changed everything. The subject line simply said, "We need to talk." And the message was brief, saying they needed to meet with me immediately about the ring situation. My first instinct was to delete the email like I had with all their previous attempts to contact me, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe some small part of me still hoped for resolution. After debating with myself for several hours, I decided to call him. What Dad told me left me completely speechless. Hannah's engagement ring had been found. 3 years after destroying my relationship with my family and forcing me to rebuild my entire life from scratch, they'd discovered that the ring had accidentally fallen into the garbage disposal while Hannah was doing dishes. She'd only realized this a few days earlier when the disposal started making strange noises, and they called a plumber to fix it. The plumber had found the ring, damaged but recognizable, stuck in the mechanisms of the disposal. Dad's voice was shaking as he explained that Hannah was devastated when she realized what had happened, that I'd been telling the truth all along and they'd treated me terribly based on a completely false assumption. He said, on the other, my family, Dad, the betrayal. I missed the holiday after I was in Mom. Hannah could, when they said they'd regretted their decision every single day since it happened, but that pride and shame had prevented them from reaching out sooner to try to make things right. Dad, who had always been a man of few words, talked for over an hour about how he'd replayed those days in his mind countless times, trying to understand how he could have been so wrong about his own daughter. Mom told me through tears that she'd kept my room exactly as I'd left it, hoping that someday I'd come home. She said she'd wake up in the middle of the night sometimes thinking she heard me coming in from work, only to remember what had happened and realize I was gone. Hannah broke down completely, saying she'd never forgive herself for making the accusation that destroyed our family and our relationship. She admitted that she'd been so focused on her own life and problems at the time that she hadn't really considered how her accusations would affect me, or what it would mean if she was wrong. As they spoke, I found myself remembering all the good times we'd shared as a family. I thought about how Hannah had defended me when kids at school were bullying me, and how she'd taught me to stand up for myself. I remembered the way she'd include me in activities with her older friends, making sure I never felt left out even though I was younger. I thought about family vacations and holiday traditions and all the ways they'd shown their love for me throughout my childhood and teenage years. But I also couldn't forget the pain of the last 3 years, the loneliness of holidays spent alone, and the struggle of building a life from nothing when the people who should have supported me had abandoned me instead. The hurt was still too raw and too deep for me to simply accept their apologies and pretend nothing had happened. I told them I needed time to process everything they'd said and figure out what I wanted to do moving forward. Mom wanted to hug me before we left, but I wasn't ready for that kind of physical closeness yet. The hurt look on her face almost changed my mind, but I knew I needed to protect myself emotionally and not rush into forgiveness before I was truly ready. I could see that my reluctance to embrace them caused them pain, but I also knew that healing from this kind of betrayal would take time and couldn't be forced. After the meeting, I went home to my apartment and spent days thinking about what I wanted. I realized that while I missed having a family, I'd also grown tremendously during the past 3 years. I'd become self-reliant, strong, and had created a life for myself that I was proud of. I wasn't the same person they'd kicked out 3 years ago, and I couldn't just go back to being that person even if I wanted to. I also recognized that seeing my family again had stirred up feelings I'd been suppressing. Despite everything that had happened, I still loved them and missed the connection we'd once shared. The question was whether it was possible to rebuild a relationship with them while maintaining the independence and self-respect I'd worked so hard to develop. After careful consideration, I decided to take things very slowly. I called my parents and explained that while I appreciated their apology, I wasn't ready to fully reconcile immediately. I told them I needed more time and space to heal from what had happened, and I established some clear boundaries about how we would interact moving forward. I said I was willing to have limited contact with them, but I wasn't moving back home or pretending that nothing had happened. I told them that if we were going to rebuild our relationship, it would have to be on my terms. They seemed disappointed, but said they understood and would respect whatever boundaries I needed to set. Mom asked if she could call me once a week just to check in, and I agreed, thinking it would be a good way to slowly rebuild trust and connection. As for Hannah, I told her I needed more time before I could consider having a relationship with her again, since her accusations had affected me the most deeply. It's been several months now since that initial meeting, and we've been slowly working toward rebuilding our relationship. The weekly phone calls with Mom have gradually become easier and more natural. We talk about neutral topics like her work at the hospital, my job at the distribution center, and the online courses I'm taking. Dad sends me occasional emails, usually just checking in or sharing articles he thinks might interest me. It's not the close relationship we once had, but it's a beginning. Hannah has struggled the most with the boundaries I've set. She sent me many long emotional texts apologizing and asking for the chance to make things right, but I've maintained that I need more time before I'm ready to address our relationship. I know she's hurting, but I'm not equipped to handle her emotional needs on top of my own healing process. Forgiveness is something that can't be rushed, and I'm learning that it's okay to take as much time as I need. I've also started seeing a therapist who specializes in family trauma, and it's been incredibly helpful. We're working through not just the immediate betrayal around the ring incident, but also the deeper family dynamics that may have contributed to how quickly everyone turned against me. My therapist has helped me understand that the issue wasn't just about the ring, but about years of feeling like I didn't measure up to Hannah's accomplishments and never quite feeling like I had a secure place in my family's affections. One unexpected benefit of this whole experience has been how much closer I've become to my chosen family, the friends who supported me when my biological family abandoned me. Jake has become one of my dearest friends, and I've developed strong relationships with my coworkers and other people I've met along the way. I've learned that family isn't just about blood relationships, it's about who stands by you when things get tough and who believes in you when others don't. I'm also proud of what I've accomplished professionally during these 3 years. I've been promoted twice at the distribution center, and I'm now managing a team of 15 people. I've nearly completed my business degree through online courses, and I'm considering applying for management training programs at larger companies. The skills I developed while surviving on my own, like resilience, self-advocacy, and independence, have served me well in my career and personal life. Recently, my family offered to help me find a better apartment, or even to help with a down payment on a house, but I declined their financial assistance. I need to continue building my life on my own terms and proving to myself that I can succeed independently. Accepting their money would feel like going backward to the person I was before this experience taught me how strong I really am. I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness lately and what it really means. My therapist has explained that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it wasn't hurtful. It's about letting go of the anger and resentment that keeps you trapped in the past so you can move forward with peace in your heart. I'm working toward that kind of forgiveness, not because my family deserves it, but because I deserve to be free from the burden of carrying around all that anger and hurt. The hardest part about this whole experience has been accepting that even the people who love us most can sometimes fail us in devastating ways. My family's betrayal taught me that I couldn't rely on anyone else to validate my worth or prove my innocence. I had to learn to believe in myself, even when everyone else doubted me, and that's been one of the most valuable lessons of my adult life, even though it came at such a high cost. As I look toward the future, I'm cautiously optimistic about the possibility of rebuilding some kind of relationship with my family, but I'm also at peace with the idea that it might never be the same as it was before. The person I've become during these 3 years of independence is someone I'm proud of, and I won't sacrifice that growth for the comfort of returning to old family patterns that didn't serve me well. I'm planning to move to a larger city next year for a new job opportunity, and while my family is disappointed that I'll be farther away, they've expressed understanding that this is what I need to do for my career and personal growth. The distance might actually be helpful as we continue working to rebuild trust and connection without the pressure of constantly confronting the painful memories associated with our hometown. What I want other women who might be going through similar family betrayals to understand is that you have more strength than you realize, even when the people closest to you lose faith in who you are. It's possible to rebuild your life on your own terms and create new definitions of family and belonging. The pain of betrayal by people you love never completely goes away, but it can transform into wisdom, resilience, and a deeper appreciation for the relationships that prove themselves worthy of your trust. The ring that started this whole nightmare was eventually repaired and returned to Hannah, though she's told me she rarely wears it anymore because it reminds her of what she put our family through. Sometimes I think about how different our lives would have been if she'd just thought to check the garbage disposal that day 3 years ago, or if she'd been willing to consider other explanations before jumping to the conclusion that I was a thief. But I've also come to understand that maybe this experience needed to happen for me to discover who I really am when stripped of everything familiar and comfortable. I'm still taking it one day at a time, learning to balance the desire for family connection with the need to protect the independence and self-respect I've worked so hard to develop. Some days are harder than others, especially during holidays and family milestones that I'm still not ready to attend. But I'm surrounded by people who believe in me and support my journey, whether they're related to me by blood or chosen by love, and that makes all the difference in the world. The journey of healing from family betrayal is not a straight line, and I want to be completely honest with you about all the messy, complicated emotions that come with it. There were nights during those first few months after being kicked out when I would lie on Jake's couch, staring at the ceiling and wondering if maybe I was losing my mind. The gaslighting effect of having everyone you trust tell you that you're a liar and a thief starts to make you question your own memories and perceptions. I found myself replaying that Tuesday afternoon over and over again, analyzing every detail to make sure I hadn't somehow forgotten taking the ring, even though I knew with absolute certainty that I hadn't touched it. The psychological impact of being falsely accused by your own family is something that stays with you long after the immediate crisis passes. Even now, years later, I sometimes catch myself being overly careful about how I handle other people's belongings. Or I find myself documenting conversations and transactions in ways that seem excessive to others but feel necessary to me. When you've had your word questioned so thoroughly by the people who should have trusted you most, you develop these protective behaviors that help you feel safer in the world. I think what made the betrayal even more painful was how quickly and completely my family turned against me. It wasn't like they struggled with the decision or gave me the benefit of the doubt for even a few hours. Hannah made her accusation, and within minutes, they had all decided I was guilty. The speed of their judgment told me something about how they'd always seen me that I'd never fully understood before. Maybe I'd always been the family member they trusted least, or maybe they'd always seen me as the one most likely to disappoint them. That realization was almost as devastating as losing them. During those early days of living on Jake's couch, I would sometimes catch glimpses of my old life and feel this overwhelming sense of loss. I'd drive past the house where I grew up and see Mom's car in the driveway, knowing she was inside making dinner for Dad and Hannah while I was eating ramen noodles in a stranger's kitchen. I'd see families shopping together at the grocery store where I worked the night shift, and I'd have to excuse myself to the bathroom so I could cry in private. Grief was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, because the people I was mourning were still alive. They just didn't want me in their lives anymore. One of the most challenging aspects of rebuilding my life was learning to trust my own judgment again. When the people who raised you and know you best tell you that you're capable of stealing from your own sister, it plants seeds of self-doubt that take a long time to grow out of. I found myself second-guessing every decision I made, from small things like what to eat for breakfast to bigger decisions about jobs and living situations. I had to relearn how to trust my instincts and believe in my own version of events, even when I had no external validation that I was right. The financial stress of starting over with nothing was crushing in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about having enough money for rent and food, although that was certainly a daily concern. It was about not having any financial safety net or family support to fall back on if something went wrong. When my car broke down during my 3rd month of living independently, I didn't have anyone I could call for help or advice. I had to figure out on my own how to find a reliable mechanic, how to negotiate a payment plan I could afford, and how to get to work while my car was being repaired. These practical challenges might seem small, but they feel enormous when you're facing them completely alone at 25 years old. The loneliness was perhaps the most difficult aspect of those first few years. I'd always been somewhat introverted and comfortable with my own company, but being truly alone for the first time in my life was different from choosing solitude. During the holidays, the isolation became almost unbearable. Volunteer to work extra shifts just to avoid being alone in my apartment while everyone else was celebrating with their families. I'd see social media posts from former classmates spending Thanksgiving with their parents or Christmas morning opening presents with their siblings, and I'd feel this deep ache for the family traditions I'd lost. What made it even more painful was knowing that my family was continuing their lives without me. Hannah's wedding went on as planned, and I found out about it through mutual acquaintances who mentioned seeing photos on social media. She got married in the church where we'd both been baptized, probably wore the same dress she'd excitedly shown me in bridal magazines just weeks before everything fell apart. Mom and Dad walked her down the aisle together, and they celebrated this milestone without me because they still believed I was a thief who had tried to sabotage her engagement. I started keeping a journal during this period, partly because my therapist recommended it, and partly because I needed somewhere to put all the thoughts and feelings I couldn't share with anyone else. Writing became a way for me to process what had happened and track my emotional progress over time. Some entries were angry rants about the injustice of my situation, while others were sad reflections on memories of happier times with my family. Reading back through those early journal entries now, I can see how much pain I was carrying and how hard I was working to convince myself that I could survive this experience. The job at the distribution center became more than just a source of income. It became a place where I could prove to myself that I was capable and trustworthy. My supervisor, Maria, was a woman in her 50s who had worked her way up from an entry-level position to management over the course of 20 years. She took me under her wing and became something of a mentor, teaching me not just the technical aspects of inventory management, but also valuable lessons about workplace communication and leadership. Maria never knew the details of my family situation, but she seemed to sense that I was someone who needed encouragement and opportunities to build confidence. When I was promoted to team leader after my first year, it was the first time since the ring incident that I felt truly proud of an accomplishment. I remember calling Jake to share the good news, and the excitement in his voice reminded me that there were people in my life who celebrated my successes, even if my family wasn't among them anymore. That promotion represented more than just a raise and additional responsibilities. It was proof that I was rebuilding my reputation and my sense of self-worth through my own efforts. The online college courses I started taking were another crucial part of my healing process. Education had always been important to me, even though I'd been more of a B student compared to Hannah's straight A record. Working toward my business degree gave me goals to focus on that were completely separate from my family drama. When I was studying for exams or working on research papers, I could forget about the pain of betrayal for a few hours and just concentrate on learning new things and expanding my knowledge. Each completed course felt like a small victory and a step toward the future I wanted to create for myself. Dating during this period was complicated because I was carrying so much emotional baggage and trust issues. Chris, the man I started seeing from the accounting department, was incredibly patient with my reluctance to introduce him to my family or talk about my background. I'd never told him the full story about why I lived alone and had no contact with my relatives, and I could tell he was curious about why I seemed to have no family connections at all. When we'd been dating for about 6 months, he started asking more direct questions about my family, and I realized I needed to either trust him with the truth or end the relationship before he got more attached. I decided to tell him everything one evening when we were having dinner at my apartment. I was terrified that he'd think less of me, or wonder if maybe there was some truth to my family's accusations, but I knew I couldn't build a serious relationship on lies and omissions. Chris listened to the entire story without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he told me he was sorry I'd gone through such a terrible experience, and that he admired how I'd rebuilt my life from nothing. His acceptance and belief in my innocence meant more to me than I could express, because it was the first time in years that someone new to my life had heard my story and chosen to trust me completely. The therapy process was challenging in ways I hadn't expected. I thought I just needed to work through my anger and heard about the ring incident, but my therapist helped me understand that there were deeper family dynamics at play that had set the stage for how quickly everyone turned against me. We explored the ways that Hannah's achievements had always overshadowed mine, and how I'd learned to minimize my own needs and desires to avoid family conflict. We talked about how my parents' obvious pride in Hannah's success had made me feel like I was always coming in second place, even before the ring incident gave them a reason to choose sides. One particularly difficult session focused on the concept of conditional love versus unconditional love. My therapist asked me to consider whether my family's love had always come with strings attached, whether I'd always felt like I needed to earn their approval and affection, rather than simply receiving it as a birthright. The more we explored this question, the more I realized that maybe the ring incident hadn't created the problem. Maybe it had just revealed a problem that had always existed beneath the surface. I found myself feeling almost sorry for her, knowing that she'd have to live with the guilt of what her mistake had cost all of us. But then I remembered all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, wondering if my own family would ever believe I was innocent, and the sympathy faded pretty quickly. The meeting at the coffee shop was emotionally exhausting in ways I hadn't anticipated. Seeing my family after 3 years of separation brought up so many conflicting feelings that I felt dizzy and overwhelmed for most of the conversation. They looked older and more worn down than I remembered, and I could see that the situation had taken a toll on them too, even though they'd brought it on themselves. Mom kept reaching across the table like she wanted to touch my hand, then pulling back when she remembered that I'd asked for space. Dad kept clearing his throat like he was about to say something important, then falling silent again. Hannah's appearance shocked me the most. The confident, polished woman who had always seemed so sure of herself looked fragile and uncertain. She'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. When she finally worked up the courage to look directly at me, I could see years of guilt and regret in her expression. She started to speak several times, then stopped herself, like she was afraid that anything she said would make the situation worse. The apologies they offered felt sincere, but they also felt insufficient somehow. How do you apologize for 3 years of someone's life? How do you make amends for forcing your own daughter to become homeless based on an assumption? How do you repair the damage caused by choosing to believe the worst about someone you're supposed to love unconditionally? I appreciated their remorse, but I also knew that sorry wasn't enough to fix what had been broken between us. Setting boundaries with my family after that initial meeting was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do, but also one of the most necessary. They wanted everything to go back to normal immediately. They wanted me to move back home and pretend the last 3 years had never happened. But I'd grown and changed during those years, and I couldn't just slip back into the role of the accommodating younger daughter who went along with whatever everyone else wanted. I needed them to understand that rebuilding our relationship would have to happen slowly and on my terms, not theirs. The weekly phone calls with Mom have been a mixture of healing and frustration. She wants to know everything about my life during the 3 years we were estranged, but some of those experiences are too painful for me to share. She doesn't need to know about the nights I went to bed hungry because I couldn't afford groceries, or the times I cried in my car after particularly difficult days at work. Those struggles made me stronger, but they're also private parts of my journey that I'm not ready to expose to the people who caused them in the first place. Hannah's attempts to reconnect have been the most challenging to navigate. She sends me long text messages detailing everything she remembers about our childhood, like she's trying to remind me of all the good times we shared before everything went wrong. She's told me about her marriage to David and how much she regrets that I wasn't there for her wedding. She's shared that they're trying to have a baby and that she hopes I'll be part of her children's lives. While I appreciate that she wants to rebuild our relationship, I'm not emotionally ready to pretend that we can just pick up where we left off before her accusation destroyed my life. The progress I've made in therapy has helped me understand that forgiveness is a process, not a destination. Some days I feel ready to let go of my anger and resentment, while other days the hurt feels as fresh as it did 3 years ago. My therapist has taught me that this back-and-forth emotional process is completely normal and that I shouldn't pressure myself to forgive faster than feels authentic. She's also helped me understand that I can forgive my family for my own peace of mind while still maintaining boundaries that protect my emotional well-being. The new job opportunity that's taking me to a different city represents a fresh start in many ways, but it's also scary to leave behind the life I've built here. Jake and my coworkers have become my chosen family, and leaving them feels like another loss, even though it's a positive choice this time. Chris has been supportive of my decision to take the job, and we're planning to maintain our relationship long distance while we figure out what our future might look like together. Having someone believe in my goals and support my career growth has been incredibly healing after years of feeling like I had to prove my worth to everyone around me. My parents' reaction to my upcoming move was complicated. They expressed pride in my professional success and said they understood that this opportunity was important for my career, but I could also see disappointment in their faces at the idea of me moving even farther away. Mom asked if the move was really about my career or if it was about putting more distance between us, and I had to admit that it was probably a little of both. I need physical space right now to continue healing and to build my own life without the constant reminder of what happened between us. As I prepare for this next chapter of my life, I've been reflecting on how much I've learned about myself during these difficult years. I discovered that I'm much stronger and more resilient than I ever thought possible. I learned that I can survive even when the people I love most abandon me. I found out that I'm capable of building a successful career and meaningful relationships without my family's support or approval. These lessons came at a high cost, but they've made me a more confident and self-reliant person. I've also learned valuable lessons about the nature of family relationships and unconditional love. The idea that blood relatives will always have your back no matter what turned out to be false in my case. But I've discovered that chosen family can be just as strong and supportive as biological family, sometimes even more so. Jake, Maria, Chris, and my other friends have proven their loyalty to me through their actions, not just their words, and that's taught me what genuine love and support actually look like. The woman I am today is fundamentally different from the person I was before the ring incident, and while I sometimes mourn the loss of my earlier innocence and trust, I'm also proud of who I've become through adversity. I'm more independent, more assertive about my needs and boundaries, and more selective about whom I allow into my inner circle. I've learned to trust my instincts and stand up for myself in ways I never did before, because I know now that I'm the only person who will always be on my side. Looking toward the future, I'm cautiously optimistic about the possibility of eventually rebuilding some kind of relationship with my family, but I'm also at peace with the idea that it might never be the close-knit family unit we were before. The trust that was broken may never be fully repaired, and that's something we'll all have to learn to live with. What matters most to me now is that I've created a life I'm proud of, surrounded myself with people who believe in me, and learned to love and respect myself even when others failed to do so. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. When the people you trust most let you down, it doesn't define your worth or determine your future. You have the power to rebuild, to choose forgiveness on your own terms, and to create the life and relationships you deserve. It's not easy and it takes time, but you're stronger than you know, and you're worth fighting for, even if you have to do that fighting all by yourself for a while. The family you choose can be just as meaningful as the family you were born into. And sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is walking away from relationships that no longer serve your highest good, even when those relationships are with people you've loved your entire life. What I've come to understand through this experience is that forgiveness and reconciliation are two entirely different things, and you can choose one without choosing the other. I'm working toward forgiving my family because carrying anger and resentment was poisoning my own heart and preventing me from fully enjoying the good things in my life. But forgiveness doesn't automatically mean I have to return to the same level of closeness and trust we had before, and it doesn't mean I have to prioritize their comfort over my own emotional safety. I think this distinction is particularly important for women to understand because we're often socialized to be peacekeepers and to sacrifice our own needs for the sake of family harmony. We're taught that good daughters and sisters forgive quickly and completely, that holding boundaries makes us cold or unforgiving. But what I've learned is that healthy relationships require both people to earn and maintain trust through their actions, not just their words. My family's apologies were a necessary first step, but rebuilding our relationship will require consistent long-term changes in how they treat me and how much faith they place in my character. The most surprising part of this journey has been discovering how much strength I had inside me that I'd never tapped into before. When I was living at home and everything was comfortable and predictable, I never had to test my limits or find out what I was really made of. Being forced to survive on my own showed me capabilities I didn't know I possessed, and taught me that I could handle far more than I'd ever imagined. That self-knowledge has been invaluable in every area of my life, from my career to my relationships to my own sense of self-worth. I want to address something specifically for the women listening who might be in similar situations with their own families. If your family has betrayed your trust or treated you unfairly, you don't owe them a relationship just because you share DNA. You don't have to accept toxic behavior or repeated patterns of disrespect just to maintain family connections. It's okay to love people from a distance if that's what you need to do to protect your mental health and emotional well-being. It's okay to require genuine change and accountability before you're willing to rebuild trust with someone who has hurt you deeply. At the same time, I want to acknowledge that every family situation is unique, and what worked for me might not be the right approach for everyone. Some families are willing and able to do the hard work of rebuilding trust and changing harmful patterns, while others are not. Some people find that maintaining distance is the healthiest choice long-term, while others are able to rebuild even stronger relationships after working through their conflicts. The key is being honest with yourself about what you need and what you're willing to accept, rather than just doing what other people expect or want you to do. The support system I built during my time away from my family has taught me valuable lessons about what genuine care and concern look like. Jake never once questioned my version of events or suggested that maybe I had done something wrong. Maria at work invested in my professional development without asking me to prove my character first. Chris chose to trust me when I shared my story, rather than looking for reasons to doubt my honesty. These people showed me what it feels like to be believed and supported unconditionally, and that experience has helped me recognize the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationship dynamics. As I prepare to start this new chapter of my life in a different city, I'm carrying with me all the lessons I've learned about resilience, self-advocacy, and the power of choosing your own path even when it's difficult. I'm also carrying the knowledge that I can survive even the most devastating betrayals and losses, which gives me confidence to take risks and pursue opportunities that might have scared me before. When you've already survived your worst-case scenario, a lot of other challenges start to seem much more manageable. I hope that sharing my story has provided comfort and encouragement to anyone who needed to hear it today. Family relationships can be some of the most complicated and painful aspects of our lives, especially when the people who are supposed to love us most fail to show up for us in the ways we need. But you have more power than you might realize to create the life and relationships you deserve, even if that means making difficult choices about who gets to be part of your journey moving forward. Trust yourself, believe in your own worth, and never let anyone convince you to settle for less love and respect than you deserve, no matter what your relationship to them might be.